and welcome to National Herald. The visuals on the screen right now are that of the Guard of Honor being given to Dilip Kumar. This is right before his funeral. As you can see, veterans from Bollywood, the Indian film industry, have gathered to show their respect to Dilip Kumar. And hello and welcome. I'm Rukmini Sen. You're watching a special on Dilip Kumar. And throughout the day, we have been speaking to journalists, filmmakers, writers about Dilip Sahab. Joining me right now is a very special guest, human rights activist, someone all of you know, Teesta Setalvad. And if you're wondering, what can a human rights activist say about Dilip Kumar? Then there is a story here. Teesta, welcome to the show. And thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show on a day like this. I know that you had a special bond with Dilip Sahab. I have overheard stories while I was setting up interviews. I've overheard stories between you and Mr. Bhatt, really talking very fondly about Dilip Sahab. Please tell our audience, what did Dilip Sahab mean to you? When did you meet him first? What are your memories of him?
See, for all of us who are from Mumbai and Bombay and all of us who are kind of, for whom Hindi films are part of our lives, I mean, Dilip Sahab, Yusuf Sahab, I mean, Dilip Kumar on the screen and Yusuf Sahab in real life was a kind of larger than life figure for all the songs, the Muhammad Rafi voice that played on his songs and everything, and the legend that he stood for. And of course, that iconic story about a man who came from Peshawar, the frontier province, made his name here and made to the top of the very screen. So all of us were in awe of him. And of course, being Mumbaikas and Bombayites at that point, awe doesn't mean anything else. It means that you're still on the same plane. You treat him as one of your own. But then comes the 90s, the 80s and 90s, which was a bitter period. It was a difficult period for India and for Bombay, and we are all reeling under it still. And I just like to start by this one sentence, which I always remember him with, when he used to keep on saying that this bhajan, which he heard when he came to India when he was young, you know, Sukhe sab saath, dukh mein na koi mere Ram. And he would say, this is the bhajan I grew up with. And for me, this was Jai Siya Ram and this was Jai Jai Ram. And how can now that entity be conjured up for lynching and for hatred and for criminal activity? And I think that was Yusuf Saab. That was the era he represented. And that was a collapse we saw in the 80s and 90s. You know, that's a collapse we saw when, good faith broke down in neighborhoods, hatred ruled, and it was made to rule. It was made that the good faith was still there, but it was difficult to shine through. And, you know, our city burned, and our city burned with that hatred in 92, 93 badly. It had burned before, but never like it happened in 92, 93. And in that period was when one got to know him very closely, because his home in Bandra with his lovely wife, Sairapa, they actually threw their doors open to social activists, social workers from bastis and mohallas, all communities equally, just to do relief and to kind of heal the ruptures that created by the hatred. And through the relief work, the rehab work, and the setting up of mohalla committees, it was Yusuf Saab and Dutt Saab, Sunil Dutt, from that arena of the film world, who were bold. They stood by their convictions. For them, the Muslim identity, Yusuf Saab's Muslim identity did not stop him. He was from this soil. It didn't matter. He claimed it. He claimed it as his own, and he intervened.
So tell me about the first time you met him. What are your first memories of him? And tell me about his house, his home. We who have reported on films forever, but have never had the opportunity and privilege to enter his home. Tell us, what was it all about?
No, actually, for us, it was very easy because we were just going in and out all the time. Like we were going out in and out of other spaces which were doing relief work. All our homes were like police control rooms at that time, because unfortunately, sections of the police control rooms were not functioning. So journalists, whether it was P. Sainath, whether it was Nikhil Wagle, Sajid Rashid, I still remember all these names, Javed, myself. It was like our homes were functioning like mini control rooms, because we were responding to calls all the time, day and night. But these were the homes, like Yusuf Saab's home in Pali Hill, Bandra, the iconic bungalow that everybody knows. We'd walk in there. I mean, there was relief happening there. The food would come, the bags would be packed. Volunteers would be coming in from the different bastis, packing and taking and going. And one would be observing that. One was not directly concerned with the relief, but one was concerned with the justice process, with the protests and all of that. And then there were so many meetings by concerned citizens. KM Arif Saab, I am Qadri Saab, who's our also part of our organization, Citizen for Justice and Peace, one of our oldest architects. These were concerned citizens who were worried about what's happening to the city and that something should be done. Vijay Tendulkar Saab, who became the first president of CJP 10 years later. So this is all happening because apart from what's happening in the bastis and where the social workers work and where the activists work, there's a section of the quote-unquote elite which is also feeling that if we don't step out and do something at this point, then maybe we will not be able to stem the rot. So for us, that's what he represented, that he did take a stand. He tried to take a stand. He tried to use his position and his influence towards healing between communities. And I think that was very important.
So Teesta, for the generation that doesn't remember what happened in 90s, can you just tell us what happened exactly? What was it that actually inspired stars like him to associate with civil rights movement in a way?
See, if you're seeing what's happening in India today, when there's a complete sense of fear and there's a sense of paralysis and there's a sense of, where are we going? And yet you have these wonderful voices coming up from stardom also and from civil society also, young people risking their lives, going to jail. The rot began in the 90s. The rot really began in the 80s and 90s, late 80s and 90s. It began, as we all know, with this extremely political movement, which is the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. It was not a religious movement. That is why I began with that quotation of Dilip Saab's about the Ram Bhajan, because there's another close friend and professor of Hindi, Purushottam Agarwal, who had coined this beautiful slogan saying, "Kan kan mein vyape hai Ram, mat bhadkao danga lekar unka naam." It was a poster that was plastered across North India by the Sampradayika Virodhi Andolan, of which he was a part. And the idea that people were trying to communicate it that the idea of this huge grand Vishesh mandir in Ayodhya, when you already had 300 mandirs to both Sita ji and Ram ji in Ayodhya, was nothing short of a political project. And the political project was an assault on our constitution. It was an assault on the pledge we gave ourselves, on the vows we took in the Constituent Assembly, where we guaranteed to our minorities that, you chose this land and this land is as much as yours as is ours. There's equality, there's dignity, there's right to life, and there's non-discrimination. All that has been shattered, and it was shattered with that one movement, which was essentially a political movement. Unfortunately, innocent people got taken in because for them, Ramji and Sita ji were, obviously household names and revered figures. Not everybody really understood that it was a kind of proto-fascist political movement. But unfortunately, the India we are seeing today, where a kind of hardened position of majoritarianism rules, where even without upturning the constitution, you have a certain majoritarianism ruling. It started then.
And what happened in Bombay? What happened in Mumbai?
The build-up to the demolition of the Babri Masjid on 6 December 92 was the Rath Yatra of L.K. Advani, Lal Krishna. He was the real mentor of this entire program. So, the current leadership should be eternally grateful to him, because he's the one who actually legitimized militarized Hinduism, or rather militarized Hindutva over a very eclectic faith like Hinduism, according to me. So he succeeded in that. He succeeded in taking the hatred to the living rooms and the drawing rooms of the middle class. So earlier it was not fashionable to be hate-filled. It was not fashionable to be, even you might carry your prejudices. Indians have always carried very bitter prejudices against Dalits, against the poor, against the working class. Dalits experience everyday violence. Minorities experienced only programmatic violence. But after that entire movement, it was the whole thing of Tushtikaran, appeasement, that here is this community that we've appeased, which is actually not based on any fact All of that propaganda worked in multiple ways. And you saw the legitimization of that hatred in our drawing rooms. And the hatred spilled onto the streets in Bombay. And it was Bombay then. It became Mumbai later. And Bombay 92-93, I still recall Sunday, it was a Sunday, December 6th, Bombay, when the Babri Masjid was demolished. And the conduct, unfortunately, immediately of the supremacist right wing and the section of the police force, I won't say everybody, but section of the police force, in allowing victory celebrations, etc., just made matters worse. And then you had between December 6th and December 10th, a lot of violence. You had police firing, which took the lives of only the minority community who were sitting inside their homes. Most of them women and children as well, in the South Bombay Bindi Bazaar area. And then you had a kind of cold, fearful silence for 3 or 4 weeks. And then you had what is that Justice Sri Krishna has documented in his report, January pogrom. You, of course, also had counter-violence by Muslim criminals in the areas against the Mathari workers and all of that. That's bound to happen when this kind of violence breaks out. But overwhelmingly, it had been directed against one section of the population who had already felt betrayed by the demolition of the masjid. So, I mean, that is the politics we are seeing, where you kind of, the victim becomes, victim is made to be the perpetrator in the eyes of the majority. And the media, media was different at,
please go ahead.
The media was different at that time to a large extent. So you had a lot of the print media actually calling this out, at least after it happened. Not, unfortunately, when the build-up was happening, which is where the problem lay. But I still recall that in the lead-up to the demolition, in that 1.5 to 2 years of the Rath Yatra of Advani's, you had newspapers like the Telegraph, the Hindu, the Hindustan Times, the Sunday Observer, including Mr. Sudhindra Kulkarni, who wrote for the Sunday Observer, who thereafter went to the BJP, writing amazing articles actually pointing out that this kind of bloodletting, wherever the yatra was going, was dangerous and it should be stopped. And it's a political project, it's not a religious project. And unfortunately, our institutions and society did not respond as much as we ought to have, maybe. And we see the results today.
And when did Dilip Sahab come in the picture? How did he approach you?
I'm sure he was concerned even before that. But as a young journalist activist, one got to know of his role after the violence had broken out in January, February. You also had the horrible bomb blasts, which were inspired by the Dawood gang and all that, the March 12 blast, which further ruptured the communities even worse off. And the Muslim community got targeted. And of course, there was a lot of anger in the majority community because of blasts that happened. So in all of these things, there were people like him who were there trying to build bridges between the police and communities, apart from doing relief itself, speaking a kind of sane language, basically saying that, listen, whichever section in whichever side is responsible for communal activity should be called out. But the everyday bonds between people should not be ruptured. The everyday going and coming, the mixed neighborhoods, the conversations, the dialogues, I mean, we should not stop that. So those voices are important and were important, and his was certainly one of them.
How was Dilip Sahab to talk to? I mean, did you have conversations with him? What kind of conversations did you have with him?
I mean, I was very much in awe of him. So but yet one will be talking only about the subject on hand, which is the subject I could speak about with some authority, because one was on the streets. One actually could give details about what was happening in neighborhoods without any embellishment. One step back from that, obviously one was in awe of him, but he would listen patiently. He would listen patiently to all the accounts that were coming in. And while there was a lot of anguish in terms of what was happening with the minority community, he would also try to play the role of taking a step back and, saying that, let's cool tempers down and let's try and figure out those people who are building bridges at that level so that things don't get worse. So I think his whole thing was that let's work on getting things better. There was another person I remember, Mr. F.T. Khurakiwala, who was then the sheriff, Fakhruddin Khurakiwala. These were, they represent that whole era where they believe that what they should stand up is for building bridges between communities. And I think that is something that I recall about Yusuf Saab, and him allowing his whole home and his place open for that kind of activity for those few months that followed.
We are told that he was Nehru's favorite actor, and Nehru was his leader. Uh, do you think? I mean, I've overheard again these conversations that you've had with other people about how beautiful a film would be if one is made on Dilip Kumar. So if just
I mean, just imagine
imagine,
the span of history that he lived
yeah.
through, okay? Whether it is him or whether it's Pataudi. I mean, Pataudi was actually my hero. I mean, Dilip Saab, I love the film, but I mean, I love Pataudi as a cricketer. And just imagine the kind of the span of the decades that they span in terms of their lives, and the fact that they represent and they became kind of symbols for our country, which is India, despite the kind and a kind of pretty proud and confident India before it got ruptured with all this hatred, you know. This despite and all this nonsense about what have we achieved in 60 years. I mean, what were we in 47, what we became in 1975? There was a big difference. I mean, we grew, we built institutions. There might have been problems, but then let's not forget that the ruling dispensation in 47-50 was ruling after, you know, a huge mass migration of people and bitter violence. So it's so easy to kind of give recipes that they should have done this or should have done that, but they actually set about healing. We had Gandhiji's assassination on 30th January 1948 within months, you know. So the project for the Hindu Rashtra was not happy to see symbols of communal amity for anybody who represented bridges between communities. They wanted to somehow rupture that, you know. And I think all these people we are talking about represent that era. You know, I remember Sunil Dutt actually also taking out those, you know, the processions in areas like Behram, Para and Kherwadi, very difficult areas because you had a lot of bloodletting taking place there and actually going down on the streets. Yusuf Saab may not have done that, Dilip Kumar, but he certainly spoke up about what he believed in, and he was very pained by what had happened to his city and country.
Teesta, like your father, Dilip Kumar was also quite a problem for Shiv Sena. I mean, both were kind of not liked so much by Shiv Sena. Tell us why.
See, actually, today, I mean, I don't want to evade the question at all, but today I'm quite amazed at the way the current chief minister is able to leave this history behind. And I would like to focus on that rather than, you know, what you asked, because today the fact that you have an MVA government, the Maharashtra Vikas Aghadi government in Maharashtra, with the Shiv Sena as a Shiv Sena leading leader as a chief minister, and he gives state honors to a man like Yusuf Saab, Dilip Kumar, and both Uddhav Thackeray ji and Aditya Thackeray go and pay respects to him, I think also represents some degree of a shift and a change. And I think let's focus on that for now. But yes, Shiv Sena had a problem with him. They didn't want him to get the Nishan-e-Pakistan award. But let's not forget Vajpayee at that time. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was very clear that he should take it and he should get it. And it was a Vajpayee government in power at the center at that time, albeit a minority government. And he did accept the award. And he accepted the award because he just came from that country. And it was like a recognition of the fact that, you know, it represented Indo-Pak ties. And I think we need to understand that there are sections, I mean, there are some sections of the Pakistani establishment that I don't like very much, particularly the kind that spawns terrorism. But that doesn't mean I hate everything Pakistani or hate everything about the Pakistani establishment. We have to build a common future together. We are neighbors. And we need to figure out a way that we'll do that without compromising on certain issues like, okay, religion-based terrorism, etc., which are causing problems, you know, for us. And we will raise voices against that as well. But that doesn't mean that when something like this happens, or when you know, cricket happens, or sports happens, or films happens, or culture happens, we can't also celebrate, you know.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving these insights, sharing these stories with us.